Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Insider Risk, What We've Learned, a Year in Review. I'm Josh Massey with MITRE and a member of the Insider Risk Working Group. Over the past year, this group has been at the forefront of tackling the evolving challenges of insider risk, and today we'll hear directly from our working group chairs about the key takeaways, the lessons learned, and strategies developed during this collaborative effort. This session also serves as a culmination of our Insider Risk webinar series. Together, we'll explore the highlights of the evolving threat landscape, hear about practical case studies, and gain insights into the innovative solutions that have been developed to mitigate insider threats. Whether this is your first introduction to insider risk management or you've been following our series closely, there's something for everyone here today. Expect actionable insights, best practices, and a future-focused outlook from the experts who have been instrumental in guiding these efforts. Please use the Q&A function throughout the presentation if you have any questions or comments that you want the panel to address. So without further ado, let's dive in. Please join me in welcoming our working group chairs, Jameson Mitchell from CDC, Michael Kraus from Everfox, and Michael Hudson from ClearForce. Please note that all of our working group chairs participate in ATARC in an individual capacity as insider threat subject matter experts. Their comments and contributions are their own and do not represent the official policies or positions of their employers. So thank you for all being here. Mike, over to you.
Mike Kraus, you got to unmute, sir.
Yeah, technology. We're going to talk about technology and how it can actually get involved in insider risk. So thanks, Josh. Appreciate the introduction. I think the biggest thing I want to get out of today is to kind of review kind of these topic areas. I mean, we sat down as a group and kind of worked through different areas that we've learned throughout the year. You know, if you look at some of the finer points and some of the highlights of our past webinars, we kind of want to revisit those and really hit on some of the points that we think that are key takeaways that insider risk managers, whether you're a seasoned vet, whether you're somebody that's just starting out, whether you're somebody that's kind of maybe doing a little more cyber, a little more insider risk, a little more continuous vetting, we wanted to hit on these key topic areas and kind of discuss these a little bit more in depth so you walk away something before you end the year. So a couple things I want to bring up here, and then I'll welcome the other chairs to jump in to discuss these, is that first and foremost, you're going to see us talk about the challenges. You know, everybody, if you can see from the diversification of our panel and the diversification of our working group, there's not one agency that is the same, meaning that whether you're a Department of Defense, whether you're a federal civilian organization, whether you're a Department of Justice organization, whether you're an intelligence community organization, you know, every agency is different, but the challenges are the same. The way you apply processes and the way you go about looking at technology, you know, that should be similar, if not the same for every organization. So we're going to kind of look at that, what the similarities are and how we can move. But success, you know, everybody wants to be successful, but it's not just in one specific silo. You can't have success in the cyber realm without thinking about insider risk. You can't have success in insider risk without thinking about cyber, thinking about continuous vetting, continuous evaluation, trusted workforce, SF-85s. All this is brought together in a multidisciplinary approach. And insider risk, to me, is not just a cyber problem. Too many times we have kind of decided that cyber and insider risk are the same thing. It's not. Yes, they complement each other. Yes, they play off each other. You're going to have a cyber indicators are provided to insider risk indicators. Insider risk indicators are provided to the cyber team. But if you're looking at it from an insider risk perspective, it's a holistic employee challenge. And we need to think about it that way. And then the continuous evaluation. Michael Hudson and Jameson do a great job of talking about, you know, different adjudication guidelines, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth on that as we go through this webinar. You're going to kind of get a better understanding of what of those adjudication guidelines are maybe the most important for your organization. So we're going to hit on that. And then technology. You know, with or without technology, technology plays a key role in anything we do, whether it's from a program or whether it's, you know, helping to identify, you know, unusual behavior or risky behavior. But it's more than just technology. It involves the resources, the analysts, your policies internally, the buy-in from your senior leaders, the buy-in from your employees. All those can be impactful for your program. So even though technology plays a significant role, the resources, the buy-in, that is also needed to make it very impactful. And then finally, a little bit of an apple pie is the community is better when we invest in each other. In all honesty, crowdsourcing is some of the best indicators, or it provides you the best insight into how your employees feel about your company, for your organization. The see something, say something is real. If you can get people to observe basically types of behavior that's inconsistent, it could potentially lead to getting left of breach and really understanding how you can help employees. Insider risk programs should not be always about big brother. It should not be about always looking for that next breach. It also should be about helping employees and bringing that wellness concept into the program. So I'm going to pause there and allow the panel members or Josh to kind of their opinions about these topic areas that we're going to dive into.
Hey, Mike, I'll jump in first, just maybe to add to that that introduction. I think the challenges are the same when I think about that through the risk, but I think their challenges are changing. So they might be the same for a government contracting firm. They might be the same for a government agency, and then for organizations that don't have a cleared workforce.
Right.
And I think when we start talking about the growth of the SF-85 and the public trust requirements that are coming online here now and into the future. So I think that one of our takeaways and would suggest to the group is the idea that risk is a dynamic problem. So we think we get it battened down and solved, and then it continues to evolve. And maybe just as a data point in history, right? You think about when the NISPOM came out and then the industry standard letter you're back 2016, 2017, right? Those are like core documents, Executive Order 13587. These are the pillar type documents that form the insider threat requirements and programs within the government. But then here we are, 8, 9 years later in some cases, and I think that we're continuing to evolve. So I think that's an important component of this. Whatever you're doing right now, that's good. Hoping some of the best practices we'll talk about here or challenges in the Q&A is that you're continuing to think about how the risk is changing. Jameson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm gonna touch on the last bullet point. Our community is better when we invest in each other. And as we go through what we learned over the last year, one of the things I want to highlight for everyone who's on the call today, and especially thanking the chairs and ATARC for allowing us to participate, is that a lot of the best practices that I've learned, a lot of the new trends, a lot of the organizational pains that we continue to experience as a government, as a country, I've learned them right here in this working group. I start to see that, it's not just a CDC problem. It's not just a, DoD problem. It's a government problem. We have to continue to fight the good fight in order to mitigate insider risk. And then, changing that stigma that insider risk or insider mitigation is to remove employees. It's not. As Mike Krause said, we're trying to get left of breach or left of boom. We want to make sure we can put our arms around that employee and bring them back, from that edge of becoming an insider. And again, that starts with being in these entire working groups where we can exchange those best practices, understand what we're all facing as a community, and then work together to improve upon that. We can go much further together than we can alone. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Josh. And Josh, go ahead and hit us with the next part here. What do you think about this one?
Are you showing your slides, Mike?
Yeah, you got me?
I'm not seeing them.
Oh, you guys can't see him?
That's interesting. I can see the slide. Josh, maybe we need some new glasses, man.
Yeah. Woo.
Well, I'll jump in on this while Josh is getting his screen sorted out. I think kind of to come off of that last slide, a lot of organizations will talk about, because there's a lot of emphasis put on the cyber network. I think you're going to see a lot of what we talk about today is that human network.
Right.
The idea of the human and how they interface not only with the technology, but how they also interface with that organization. This is that risk conversation. But we're picking it up, if you will, on our journey post that hire. So a good best practice to think about is for the security team to be engaging with HR. And so ideally, when HR does that initial hire, the security was part of what type of background check that was, or what were some key elements of that. And a lot of times that's been another important kind of concept. People say a background check, that's like saying I drive a car. You really need to think through some level of definition. What exactly is the background check? And again, this is where security on the very early can help set the conditions for that really good hire that comes in. And I've seen some really good best practices, especially around those organizations that are hiring individuals that will have to go through the SF-86 or go through a clearance process for suitability adjudication. I think that's one. But again, we want to continue you to think through those non-cleared workers, the SF-85, and then organizations that simply rely on that background check. So it's important. And as you see on that right, kind of teasing out the key stakeholders, we're going to talk more about that. But insider risk, employee wellness, if you will, or the whole idea of trying to reduce the risk within the organization, it's all hands on deck effort.
Well, let me ask a question.
Yeah.
This is probably a question for Mike, Josh, and Jameson. So, okay, say you have a new employee that comes in, because I mean, I don't have this thing. You have a new employee that starts, right? And you're an insider risk program. Do you get any kind of information on the person from a background check? Meaning that, is that part of your kind of initial behavior level setting of what individual is that part brought to the program, or is that maintained within HR that says the point in time of the background check, do you get information? Because I don't know. And I want to, you guys, Josh, Mike, are you getting that information? Josh, are you privy to that information, or is that kept in a silo as we talked about elsewhere?
I would take it a step back further.
Okay.
I think one of the areas that I focused on very early in program development was creating those standards. The background investigation historically was those standards were created by HR through an HR lens, and focused on that. And that's okay. That's not wrong. I think what this slide highlights is the value of the team effort. Just like we talked about in the intro, tackling these complex problems, the thing that excites me about this working group is the diversity of thought. And I think down within our programs, we've got to champion that diversity of thought. So HR has a role, and what we can do is bring together a team and foster a diversity of thought to look at that role in a different light and realize, yes, the HR requirements for vetting are important. We're not putting those aside, we're not subletting them, but we're bringing additional perspectives to that issue so that a rising tide raises all boats, that we can enhance that process so that we can be confident that the process vets our personnel, and we can be confident that the personnel that are coming into the program have been properly vetted. Then we can deal with when we surface issues, how we surface those issues, but underpinned, are we confident in that process? Have we built this collective team and are informing those processes collectively to have the ideal outcomes?
James, do you see that in government? Do you get that viewpoint? Like Josh is saying, he's working in the MITRE and he has a little more, but the government seems to be a little different now. From a government perspective, do you get that opportunity to be part of those working groups or part of that input?
So the onboarding process kind of excludes insider risk. As you're doing the adjudicative steps and going through the security clearance background to bring that person on board, if they don't pass those initial checks, then they don't become an employee for the government. Right. Those who may have some issues, I think those kind of remain siloed within the security realm. They're not sharing that, hey, this person barely passed adjudication. That's something that our security team handles when they're doing their background investigations, but we don't see that when we're doing the initial hiring. You can't be an insider risk until you're an insider, right? So we're not seeing those things when an employee is onboarding for the first time. You start to see those issues, they may or may not arise after employment. But then when we start to see that, hey, there was an issue, then we can go back and say, hey, security, well, you're aware of these potential avenues of insider risk. And then that's when we start to kind of put the picture together. One of the things I've learned in some of the courses I've taken, and we'll allude to this in later slides, is past behavior is a good predictor of the future. So if someone has continuously had problems with alcohol, they may enroll in some type of employee assistance program or some type of rehabilitation program, but they're not no longer an alcoholic at that point. They're
Right.
just taking the steps to kind of mitigate. But it doesn't mean they may not have a relapse or something may happen in the future. But then it allows us to kind of look at that past behavior and say, yeah, that was a pretty good indicator of a future problem on our hands.
Yeah, Mike, I jump in. I got a comment on that too. Not specifically on that last part, Jameson, but I think to what Josh started us down that path. And it's the idea of the team effort, right, on both the beginning. But I also think that idea we have down there on privacy compliance, these are like the guardrails. Mike talked about it at the very beginning. So as you build out your insider threat program and you put the team together, a key component of that is legal. And I say that because you really need them to define what are the reporting requirements within your company? What are the do's and the don'ts? And that begins the conversation around framing expectations of the workforce. And I think that's important because then from those expectations become risk signals. I mean, you're defining what you think is risky. We'll talk more about that later on, but I think that's the piece. And maybe one other kind of comment I would tease off of this slide as a risk gap, and we may not be able to solve it, but at least identify it. And this goes to Jameson's comment about, well, when the government hires, you go through this process. But who's taking care of the vending machines? Who's out there doing your security? Who's doing the yard maintenance? Or who's coming in and doing the janitorial? So what you have to think about is the contracting population that is also gets physical access into your spaces. And a lot of times we focus on individuals who we card badge in, but there's also a lot of other contractors and then contractors that play a key role. So you go to the government, I think close to 1 million contractors. I don't have the exact number. There's a large number of contractors that are on government sites. In fact, there's a ton of companies here that do that.
And physical access is a tough thing to monitor. I mean, when you're talking about that, it's hard to use technology to identify physical access. I mean, yeah, you have some observation and stuff like that, but that is a very difficult, that relies a little bit on, we talked a lot about the manager's responsibility and roles. And we'll talk more about that, to being close to the employees and understanding your employees and what the manager's role plays in that. So I think that's one of the things, but let's move on to the next topic area.
Before we move on, I'm going to throw you guys the first curveball and go to the first question we have. And I think it is relative to this. We've heard the perspective of a government program, an industry program, the importance of understanding that partnership, the importance of privacy and legal. Looking to a new administration turnover, do we anticipate any major upheaval or shifts in how we're approaching insider threat? Whether it be policy or emphasis.
I'm going to take the easy path on that one, Josh, and say this. I think anytime you have change, and I'm going to take it to like a merger and an in this case, we're going through a merger and acquisition. Some professional, think of you have your professional staffers, and then you have your staffers tied to members that are going to rotate in and out. But I think what you're going to see, not just on the Hill, but you can look even in organizations where you have non-politicals that this is what they do for a living. It's an M&A. And I think that's an area where risk will open, because what you're going to have is people who are staying are going to be concerned about what's going on. Am I still going to have a job? What's that look like? Yeah. New people coming in are going to say, I need my clearance today. Expedite that. The term interim applies to me. Let's get me in the fight right away. I think this is really, and I would suggest, and I'm sure the government does this pretty well, you should be thinking about how you would do for organizations when you go through an M&A. That's how I would translate this to a larger conversation. This is a high risk area for insider risk.
And I think it makes sense that everybody the program should be conscious of changing people's opinions about the political view. Goes into how their behavior is. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it is. Whether you agree, disagree, it happens with every administrative change, it doesn't matter right or left. It happens with administrative changes. And having, the awareness that political impacts people's behavior, impacts their mood, impacts how they operate and handle data. I don't think that's, a surprise to anybody. And I think every insider risk program should be aware of it, should be working with, across their whole, all their stakeholders, and gauging, is this looking at the trend and the behavior in the organizational mood, they have to be tracking that. and they better be on top of them, because this could cause potentially risk to national security, whether somebody believes they're going to do it maliciously or non-maliciously. So like Michael Hudson said, because they're fearing they're going to lose their job, I'm a contractor, the contract's changing, I'm going to lose my job, I need to take some information out so I can get better position myself for the next job. They might not be thinking that's malicious, and you have to protect against both inadvertent and malicious. So I think it will cause an impact, and I think insider risk programs are going to be right in the heart of it, and they should prepare themselves.
I think regardless, I'll save Jameson from having to take a position on this.
Yeah, James can take this on the next one.
I think regardless of the volatility of natural change, what we do know is the executive order has withstood 3 administrations,
Yes,
including the new administration. And all we've seen is that the scope has been expanded over time. So
yeah.
I personally don't anticipate any drastic changes. I think, the fact that it has withstood 3 administration changes emphasizes the importance.
Hey, Josh, and I'll just kind of pile on that. That's a great point, and one of the things that I definitely want to highlight. Not only has that executive order maintained those changes, but insider risk is not good for any administration. If it's loss of classified information to an adversary or mission, a network being infiltrated, any insider risk that you have is not good for any administration, regardless of who's in control or not. So I think that's one of the things I would ask anyone to kind of focus on is remember the insider risk mission has to stand the test of time. It's an apolitical function. It's one of those things that we want to ensure that we're protecting not only the American people, but democracy as we know it. So if we start to let classified information go to our adversaries or we lose our competitive edge, that's not good for anyone. So if nothing more, we should feel more empowered as insider risk practitioners to carry on the mission.
Good deal. All right, Josh, what about this? We're talking about critical path, and I think what would be your observation on, I think there's different frameworks that we kind of have, right? Everybody has maybe a potential framework. Critical path is one way that the psychologists tell us to look at the problem, a way to get in front of it. Everybody has, stressors concerning behavior, allowing us to potentially identify those, giving them an off-ramp before it becomes an attack, before they can do damage, before they can do, some response. So this is, what is your view of a critical path, or a different pathway that you want to talk about?
No, my input would simply be this was been a recent topic of discussion amongst the advisory board to the U.S. Insider Risk Center of Excellence, and will be a focus I think you'll see coming out of that body in the future around just taxonomy, creating common language and common operating picture of these things, and what we've begun to coalesce around is the idea that guidance is really organizational thought for a program, and frameworks are really an organizational thought for individual behaviors. And I think that's what we've seen with critical pathway. It's a organizational construct in which we can interpret individual behavior to then inform decisions. And I think there are a number of frameworks out there, and as long as we root ourselves in understanding what is framework for interpreting behavior and decision making versus guidance for a broader programmatic principles, I think we're in a safe space.
Okay.
And they both are relevant, just depending on the question.
Exactly.
I'll take a bite at this one too, in the sense that I agree, Josh, what you laid out, critical pathway to violence. There's a lot of models that have evidence and research and behind them that says this is a trajectory. And I think what Mike talked about on the opening slide, this idea of stressors, I think that's an area where if we move left, and everybody wants to move left, get left to bang, I think as we move left, we get into data ambiguity to some degree. What does that mean? So we go back to the adjudicative guidelines. Okay, you had a DUI. Does that mean you're going to actually tomorrow, sell secrets?
Right.
I don't know. But maybe that's a stressor. Maybe something below that. You haven't been able, you're balancing your finances, and you're not doing anything illegal. You're like, I'm going to make a payment here. I got to move money. You're constantly under financial pressure, which I think a lot of Americans are just from jump. Does that make you an insider threat? Or back to Michael's wellness is if the organization was aware of stressors, could they engage with a positive or proactive mitigation strategy with an idea around retention? So an idea, you haven't done anything necessarily that causes us to open an investigation through a national security lens. But if we don't engage with that individual at this point, they're going to go down. That's why I like the idea of the pathway. And the other thing that I do like on that is that the maladaptive organizational response.
Yeah.
I think that's a critical piece. I just think that, and you see this in all kinds of things. I'm struggling, whether it's, I'll just say I'm struggling, and the organization appears through my lenses not to care.
Right.
So now all of a sudden, back to Mike's point earlier, we were talking about, the transition here. Maybe I feel like the organization no longer supports me. So now maybe I feel like I'm an island amongst myself.
Right.
Maybe I feel like I'm justified in doing what it is I do next.
So I like this slide for looking back at what we've done over the last year. So Dr. Briggs and Pete Lapp from BTAC, having them on, we're starting to see that insider threat practitioners don't necessarily have to be insider threat practitioners. They can be those behavioral psychologists. They can point us to that science and say, hey, this is what the trends show. When you're looking at the scientific background behind how they're getting to these models, Dr. Shaw, this has become, the adopted model for insider risk programs, across the US government. And I'd be remiss if we didn't focus on the maladaptive response, because that's at the attack and damage phase. Mike Hudson has left me with this over the last year. If you're a hammer, you're looking for nails. And that's what everyone sees the insider risk program is, looking for a nail to hammer. And it can't be that. The maladaptive organizational response, to Mike's point, is if we're not putting our hands around that employee, saying, hey, how can we, make your situation better? How can we improve, where you are so that we can, keep you off the precipice of becoming that insider risk? That's what the organization owes. We need, insider threat practitioners that are looking at it from that lens, not necessarily the, I have to remove this employee because, they're exhibiting indicators. No, how do we, retain that employee? That's what we need to focus on, employee retention, and not being maladaptive in how we respond to things.
And you know what? Employee retention saves the organization's money.
Absolutely.
I mean, so let's bring it back to the business value, which we sometimes don't do. If you can retain your employees, that means you can save you money, that can be more efficient in your workforce. If a person has a clearance, how much money you can save by not having somebody get cleared. So all that plays into, once again, demonstrating the business value of, your organization and your program.
And loss of institutional knowledge as well, Mike Krause. I mean, that's another thing we want to, contribute. If you've got a 25-year employee and all of a sudden they're, on that precipice of being an insider risk, and you want to get rid of them, that's institutional knowledge. You're not going to get that 25 years.
You're not getting that back. You're not even getting that back at all. So definitely on that. So we talked a lot about stress. We talked about, different types of stress. So one of the things that we brought up here, Josh, is, kind of looking at, the different type of stress indicators that you might see, whether it's somebody being distracted, susceptible, vulnerable, even unhealthy, the way they're doing it. So we kind of looked at, a lot of different stressors, kind of boiled it down to this. And one of the things that was brought up was, you kind of look at the financial stressor. That was an example. That's the number one reason that, U.S. security clearances are not renewed. Mike Hudson brought up that fact. And I thought that was very interesting about, how finance and the way you perceive finances. And that's an interesting one, because I've been to different, talks. And I love somebody, I forget who brought it up. It might have been somebody even in our webinar said, you know what, Mike? He goes, you yourself probably perceives debt different than me. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, he goes, and the person asked me point blank, he goes, what do you think about credit card debt? I was like, I hate credit card debt. I was like, I pay mine off every month. I pay it off. And I said, what about you? He goes, I let it ride. And I'm thinking to myself, that would drive me crazy. I would just drive me crazy. It would get me stressed out if I saw a balance on my credit card. So each individual handles stress differently and handles financial stress differently. So I thought that's interesting that we can't put that, one touch to everybody. Everybody handles it a little different. In any kind of process or technology or roles or any kind of things we have, and it has to take into the human part, the human factor in all this stressors. So any comments on that from like Josh or Mike or Jameson, and anything on this that brought your attention right away?
I'll take it. Yeah, go ahead, Jameson.
I would say that it goes back to the one glove, doesn't fit all. You're right, 100%. And that's, again, one of the challenges for practitioners in the insider risk and, our entire insider risk hub is looking at each individual differently. Someone who's, $100,000 in debt may manage that fine. To your point, someone who's, $1,000 a month is too much of a balance to take. But we have to kind of step back, and it goes back to the previous, slide with the maladaptive organizational response. Let's look at how that person is handling and responding to that. On the flip side, someone, with a heavy debt load may, exhibit some indicators of insider risk, and we want to make sure that we don't necessarily dismiss the risk without, a fair look at it and how that person handles it.
Yeah, I would disagree with that real quick, Mike. Out of the first part of that, I guess what I would say this, some people on this webinar today go like, hey, these people are insider threat professionals. They should be finding bad people and stopping bad things from happening. Why are we worried about HR deploying EAP resources? Where that looks like, and I think that just goes back to as the program continues to evolve and the idea of cost to hire. I think Jameson hit on that. What's it cost to hire someone? Well, it's significantly more if you hire and fire. If you can retain, you're winning on all sides. The knowledge stays, the employee stays, costs stay down. Organizationally, you retain one for doing the right thing. That's where you start to build trust. But I like these 4 bullets because it really opens the door, though, for us insider threat professionals to be thinking about it. So someone who is under a great deal of pressure and stress, if you look at the 13 adjudicated guidelines, and they are struggling within those categories, the first thing we've all talked about is you have to have the ability to see that. If you can't see it and you're blind to it, then that individual's on their own. And if they're on their own, this is kind of where they can struggle. And I think there's a counterintelligence conversation in here because, again, that idea you're vulnerable to exploitation. I mean, MICE was the old acronym back in the day: money, ideology, coercion, ego. That's how you think about approaching an individual. Well, if they're struggling through any of those 13 adjudicative guidelines, that's a window in time. That's a risk surface that individual has, the organization's blind to. But I can tell you our adversaries are actively looking to find key individuals that are struggling. So we go back to this and say they may not be doing something wrong initially, but you got to be aware of those employees. And yeah, you got to get EAP involved if that's one of your tools in the toolbox. You may have to use others, but that's what I think we tease out of here is that fact, if someone is under stress, there is all kinds of impacts of which the organization takes on risk. And even you can see just by looking at this, underperforming, you're paying someone for a full time and they're only giving you half time. Unhealthy is important too, because you start thinking, what's the cost of sick leave lost? So you go through this model, and this goes back to where we started, that post-hire. I think it's important you rally those stakeholders around your desire to discover individual employees who are struggling, mitigate that, deploy that resources early, is a win.
But Josh, Mike talks about evolving program, and I think we hear, what has your program evolved? Have you gotten to the point where you started out as a specific, hey, we're focused on MITRE intellectual property that's leading our organization, and now you've gotten to the point like, okay, I'm evolving as a program? Because I know you started probably slow, crawl, walk, run, and get to where you need. Have you seen this in your organizations?
Yeah, and I certainly am not going to go on record today to say that we've arrived at nirvana and that we've got this solved. But, I think what Mike was saying and what Jameson was saying, I would take those comments and raise the stakes and say, are we looking at this problem not just as individuals, but as an organization? And back to the maladaptive response, what are we positioned as program managers and senior officials to advise the company? Is this policy going to create stress? Is this policy going to distract, make our workforce susceptible, make our workforce vulnerable? And I think as we evolve as a program, that's where we naturally have to go from looking at, are those risk factors present in individuals, to, as an organization, are we creating risk? And are we aware of that? And that's not to say that we won't make those decisions and not go down those routes, but that should be a talking point. That should be a known risk decision, and risk and insider risk programs can be an incredible voice and advisor to those corporate decisions, and should be.
Yeah, and I wonder if Amazon made that decision when they said we're all coming back to work 5 days a week. But we'll leave that discussion for another time. So let's go to the next one. Always throw that out. Love you, Amazon, but that was I don't wonder if they did the risk exposure on that decision before they send people back. All right, let's talk a little bit about human capital management. And we kind of use this term a little bit differently. So we were trying to bring in the holistic person, the human part of it, the aspect of it, and the role of the program manager in human capital management, role of insider risk management. So, Josh, when you look at the slide, Josh, does any one of these things stick out to go, are we missing something? We put something up here. Is there something that we're missing in the role of an insider risk management today? Is there something that you would add to this list?
I don't know that I would add to it, but I think it underpins, the word that each of you have used several times, which is holistic approach, right? And this slide does a good job of extrapolating that out into an employee life cycle, right? That throughout the life cycle, we need to be aware of and engaged in different aspects, and that's just another, guidance or framework to look at the problem. Right? We look at the problem from a framework of things that are going wrong, but what about a framework of where we can intercede and do things right?
Yeah.
So I think this does a great job of highlighting that and thinking about that employee life cycle and where we can have touch points to keep the employees on the right track, right? On if there's a critical pathway, what is we come up with a pathway for pathway to success.
I like that. The fact you said focus on what we're doing right. I mean, we always focus on everything we're doing wrong, but it's like in some cases, and you want to be able to demonstrate that to employees, right? I mean, Mike, or Jameson, you want to kind of be able to tell that, communicate that to employees, have your managers have town halls and kind of express the good things your program's doing, not just always, that we're looking for the next, Snowden or whatever it is, but you want to express the good things your program do. Is that part of the security awareness, employee? Where do you see that in the communication aspect of the role of insider risk and communicating?
So I think it's hard to capture the good. I mean, how do you measure, insider risk? It's
yes.
But it's easy to highlight our failures. If classified information ends up, on the front page of whatever newspaper or website, that's an issue that you have right there, and that's going to make the news front and center. But deploying EAP to, protect that employee, we're not going to highlight that. That's never going to be something that people are going to be recognized for. Maybe, internally, you may get that recognition, but it's hard to add value to what an insider risk program is.
So how do you capture the good, Jameson? How do you capture it? What would you do if your boss came to you and said, hey, you're doing some great stuff. How do we make sure to communicate the great stuff you're doing, within the program? How do we do that? Is there any advice that you give to somebody? Say, is it at the worker bee level, the ground level with the managers, or is it something from the CEO's level? What would you recommend to how to get the goodness out?
So one of the things that I, have learned over this working group's year, and also, just to answer your question more specifically, security awareness in the workforce. That's the obligatory annual security awareness training you have to take. I'm sure all of my DoD colleagues, where, you have to go through the computer simulation. If someone steals your phone, what do you do? Do you chase them? Or that has to evolve. And some of the greatest feedback I got is, the obligatory security awareness training that we were doing annually, it changed, it evolved, it showed more real life scenarios, not the computer animations, but it showed that we were now addressing what the employees completely are over. And we're not going to go chase the guy. I'm not going to leave my classified in Starbucks, but now we're adding more real life examples. We're giving more of a voice to the employees and saying, hey, we understand that this training is not moving the needle for you, but now taking that training and evolving it, making sure that it's more real life scenario based, talking about, talent programs and how, adversaries are trying to recruit you and those avenues that they may go through. And then, changing that training to now be more introspective for the employees. And now we're getting great feedback. It's like, hey, now we understand what insider risk is. It's not just the see something, say something, but it's see something and understand what you're seeing, how to report that, and then how are you going to respond? Because a lot of the times, going back to maladaptive organization response, people are afraid to report to us because they're like, if I go tell, Jameson or Josh or both of our mics here that this employee is, demonstrating these behaviors, they're going to get rid of them. And I don't want to, cause that stress. So now it's like, one of the most effective ways we measure it is when people report to us, we do the right thing. We don't have just an instant hammer in the nail response. It's, hey, let's understand this problem. Let's figure out how we can put our arms around the employee and make this a better scenario for that employee, and get one of those outcomes that we're all, that Hallmark can make a movie about, essentially. But that's why I think you measure those things, is ensuring that when you reinforce to your workforce, we're not just here to be the bad guys. We're here to be support.
So I'll take a stab at that too, and maybe go slightly different. So like we talk a lot so far about what I'll call tactical solutions, that the individual, that insider. This is a really good way to tee up under awareness, a strategic look across your organization. And I think Mike, you're kind of getting at that with metrics. I think that as you think through your insider threat program, as you build that out, you have the policies, we'll talk more, you have some way to discover that risk. But I think this is the analytics that's helpful, where you're sitting back and you're looking at a direct or an indirect measurement. I think Jameson totally talked about what I would call an indirect measurement. That is, are we seeing more people coming forward and reporting concerns? That underpins trust. If organizations don't have a level of trust, you're going to see almost no reporting coming in. People are like, I'm not saying anything, right? I'm not the snitch. They have this idea that if I say something, I'm doing something wrong for my fellow employee, right? And I'm helping management against employment. So I think that idea of enhanced reporting is good. I think as you build out, think about your analytics models. What are you doing here to take a look at across the organization? So if you think about like Jameson, where you got different labs and facilities laid out, can you cross-level and share information across those? So this is where analytics, I'm seeing more of this or less of this. I mean, I go back to my time in the military, we were always kind of paying attention to what was going on at the base. What was the installation seeing, not just what my unit was seeing, because there could be leading indicators of risk there that are important. And I think this idea that awareness too, and that training, your training should be synced not only on the calendar, it's this time we're going to do some training. I think your training should be influenced by your analytics. What are we seeing as the risk in our workforce today? Our training should then be a mitigation component of that.
Right. And that's where maybe AI could help a little bit on that. Just for some of the training, looking at the data in a different view, in a different landscaping, from a business value perspective. We did a whole session on AI before that, it's out there available in ATARC land as well, that you might find interesting for everybody. But let's move on here. So, all right, so this is an interesting one. We talked a lot about, direct and indirect measurements. We talked a little about the role of the managers. But we also talked about a little bit about technology. So one of the things we see as technology does, all of us, want to use technology effectively. But what we see is that technology, and I like the way Michael Hudson maybe put in a word of how. So initially I had tells managers when to act, but he kind of said, hey, why don't we put in the how to act? Because technology can help us not only decide when to take act and when we can need to jump in, but it also can tell us how to act. Whether it's something that's coming from an HR problem or a cyber problem or a law enforcement problem, it can give us those indicators and those warnings and those precursors telling us how to act. But it really comes down to the managers, right? The managers have to be empowered, they have to be trained, they have to be resourced, and they have to deliver effective mitigation. Because it still is a people problem at the end of the day. So training our managers, getting them to the point where they're comfortable of responding. Because look, if you are a manager, you have to deal with people. I've had people in the past, I've had managers in the past that had 400 or 500 people underneath them, but they can't stand people. I always laughed at them. I was like, you're not a people person, but you're dealing with people. So it's kind of but you have to deal with people. That's part of the problem. So what is this? Does this resonate with everybody here, or is this way off that, that we're on the wrong path here? Do we see technology as an enabler for managers than, kind of what we're doing? So Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I think from inception, technology has always been a looming question when it comes to insider threat. I think early on it was viewed as, just throw a bunch of technology at it and we'll solve the problem, easy button. And now we've even evolved to, with AI, maybe even a little scared of technology.
Right.
I think the underpinning thought, though, throughout all of that is that we have to have a holistic view of technology and understand it, where it can create value, where it has limitations, and ultimately technology is about delivering information to make decisions. And
right.
the human will always make those decisions. It's about making better decisions and faster decisions. But we as humans have the ability to do critical thinking that is critical to this problem and cannot
Right.
be divorced from the problem. And I think that's the important message and view of technology. And this, we'll have this discussion a year from now, and it'll be a completely new topic. But I think the answer will still be the same.
Yeah, it's human. At the end of the day, it's going to be somebody who's making a decision. So I'm going to move on to another one just because I think for the sake of time, because I want to get to the kind of what we're doing from a maturity model. So Michael and Jameson, what do you think? I know there's a lot of work that's done on maturity models. National Insider Threat Task Force has a maturity model. Can you kind of highlight, kind of where we're at in this stage, and then, so maybe some places that people can look if they need help in kind of understanding what maturity models are at and available?
I'll go first, James, so you can come over the top. Yeah, I think CDC, what is it? CDSC is a really good government website, has a ton of really good information on that. I think what ATARC is doing too, shout out to this team. There's a lot of really good stuff. I think Josh, that Center of Excellence that you're participating in, I think that's another really good resource on a go forward basis. And I think what MITRE's starting to do with the insider risk attack chain, I don't know how far you guys have moved down that, but I think that's going to be a really good tool when it comes online, what MITRE's doing there. But for this particular slide, I think this is, from my thinking, is for the person that woke up on Monday, came into the boss's office and says, "Hi, you're the new insider threat senior program official. Go." Right. And I want the program to pass the DCSA inspection. Huh? So this really, as you start to try to figure out how to eat the elephant, there is the NITF has got some really good stuff. But to me, I think this is a way to think about it. And I won't go through each of the chapters of your blocks, but the goal of this really is to think through how you're going to form that program. And these are kind of the key things. And we've talked about that in this idea, right? You got to own the program, but you got to have the silos broken down, not only the key leaders, but you want your entire workforce to own this.
And I think that's key. Boy,
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of good information available. So, so I think this leads us into another one, because I think this will lead us into this discussion here a little bit. And I wanted to make sure we have time to hit this one, because I think this is important. Talk a little bit about continuous vetting, with respect to insider threat and DCSA, DITMAC. This is just and I want, because I know Jameson and Mike and probably Josh have very different opinions about, or maybe opinions about how this impacts. So I want you guys to kind of articulate first what this means, kind of some of the adjudication guidelines. But Jameson, I also want to talk to you about the SF-85 and the impact. So somebody could take the lead here, tee this one up, and then we could have a discussion on this one as well.
Hudson, I'm gonna let you take the lead on this one, and I'll come over with the SF-85.
Nice. All right, cool. All we did with this one slide is again, back to resources available. If you go to DCSA and DITMAC lookup, you're going to find under the continuous vetting process, that's their chart. So, shout out to the US Gov. Then you're going to notice the key data sets on there that they list: terrorism, foreign travel. You can go down and look at those themselves. I think it's interesting as you look at financial activity and credit. That goes back to this idea of two different data sources looking at the number one reason you lose your clearance, and that's financial. I think that's important. We showed on previous slides in the text that financial struggles, we all deal with it. Organizations, in many cases, are blind to it. So the last thing I would say, really, and I'll kick it over on this, is you're building out your programs. You really need to be thinking about where, if you had a limited amount of resources, where do you want to focus your sensors? And I would suggest, when you take a look at what the government's telling us, is 80% of the reason you lose a clearance or get it denied are those of the 13 adjudicative guidelines. Those that are on that right side are the ones. You need to have the ability to see into that data. You need to have the ability, I would suggest, to use triggers or push, not just acquire large sums of data. And the other thing you should think about, and the government's moving from CE to CV, is the idea that if your data strategy is tied to time, or your insider threat program is tied to time, you're behind the power curve. You need to be continuous on a go forward. So I'll pause there, James, to toss over to you for any thoughts.
Yeah. So for any agency that's on today and listening, if you're not Title 50, so not DoD or the IC, there's always a lack of resources there. But now you're going to see the SF-85 public trust population come online here soon, and they're going to have those reporting requirements as well as your SF-86 holders. So Mike Hudson alluded to the elephant. Yeah, it's going to be a bigger elephant because now you're going to take more bites here. You're going to have more people who are going to be experiencing, some of those automated checks that are going to alert to some indicators. But again, it goes back to, what Josh, previously mentioned, the human element. We can have AI, we can deploy the technology, but the technology can't understand a pandemic and what those stressors may cause for someone financially or emotionally. So it's still going to be that human element that takes a look at whatever the automated database checks reveal. But now you're going to have a larger population with your public trust population coming on board that you're going to have to look at. It's still the same mission. You just got to look at it, through a different lens now and try and make those good risk mitigation determinations.
So Josh, do you take, I know we follow some of the adjudication guidelines, if not any, do you guys do something similar where you're looking at the guidance that is putting out by a DCSA or a DITMAC and helping kind of, take those lessons learned or best practices also in what you're doing from your program? Is that maybe one of the, practices, maturity guides that you use for yours?
Yeah, I think you have to be, whether you're dealing with clearances or not,
Right.
if you're in the 13 adjudicative guidelines, I think you're on solid ground from a legal and privacy perspective. It gives a standard and again, organization to how you look, how you monitor. I think, I'll get on my soapbox here. I love this slide. But anybody that knows me for a while, what this slide tells me most is we still have work to be done in information sharing between government and industry.
Yes.
Yep.
We view this as a partnership because there's a richness of data that the government has, a richness of data that the owning corporation has, and the two shall never meet sometimes, I feel. And really, I think to the employee's benefit, I think we can resolve these matters quicker, earlier in the process, and not have that CV issue hanging over the employee. So we've got to do a better job as a community to bridge that gap.
Do you think, where do you think that's going to happen? Do you think that's going to happen within DCSA? Do you think it's going to happen? I'm looking at it like, it seems like that problem we've had for like a little while now.
We've been publishing white papers on this since 2018. I don't know.
I know. I didn't want to say that. I was like, we have a lot of discussion on this. So where does it take a different mindset? Is it take a different process? What is it? Somebody unwilling to share on both sides, or it's not a technology problem. To me, it's not a technology. Technology's there. We can share information. That's not the problem. Is it just that there's we don't trust each other to have that information? What is going in that we believe
it's an unfounded fear of risk of legal exposure, and I think ultimately it's going to require someone in authority to step forward and create an umbrella of legal protection and make it a requirement and not a decision. Because once someone requires Jameson to share that information with me, I know Jameson wants to. That's not the problem, right? He needs that legal protection, and that legal protection needs to be done through a requirement. And we've seen activity where that's come close to happening before, but we're just not there yet.
Okay.
It's kind of like what we're doing with security clearance reciprocity. You can, go from agency to agency, and now, the reciprocity is a lot faster. Why aren't we doing that in the insider threat community? Because if I've got an insider threat and they say, hey, I'm out, I'm leaving, I'm going to industry now. Now industry has an insider threat.
Right.
That doesn't help anyone.
Yes, there's no sharing going on. I am all in on that. So if somebody could go ahead and talk to the new administration, maybe we can get that done. Mike Hudson, go ahead.
Yeah, no, as you move, I know you're going to move quickly to the next slide. My only part on that is I agree with everything on there. It's the privacy and compliance. We said that's important to have in your program. Yeah. I think as we continue this conversation to both what everyone's saying, your programs have to be able to have the lockdown privacy compliance so you can plug into a government program that is absolutely locking it down. If you can't show that you can be trusted to move the information, that's a problem.
Yeah, right? Yes, and that has to be part of it. That has to be part of the consistency for everybody sharing. So agree. All right, let's talk a little bit about that, and then we're almost done. We got 5 minutes to go, everybody. So we'll hang with us. I think we got a couple cool little nuggets to start with you. But I think we put this one up that says, look, the human behavior risk signals are different for everybody, meaning that a lot of the different indicators you get, whether you're in HR, whether you're in developer and engineer, finance, whether you're in IT, it basically everybody's role impacts their risk signals, and it should fall back to an internal policy. You need to map it. We talked a lot about mapping back into a framework, adjudication guidelines. There's a lot of mapping, and the roles are part of the mapping. Some of the roles are more high risk that you might want to have technology applied for somebody monitoring somebody that's more of a high risk job because they have access to more data, to more systems, and to more people. That should be part of your consideration for your program. So if any wants to articulate on this, Josh or Michael or Jameson, we just want to make sure everybody's aware that there's different roles and different behaviors that you can see out of roles, and it has to map to policies.
I think you nailed it.
Awesome. All right. Give it last 4 minutes. So this is an interest. We want to bring this up because everybody loves a use case, and this is nothing against our friends over at Booz Allen Hamilton. But we just picked one out of the air, and we wanted to show that not about who it is or what it is and what company it is. It's about there were indicators, leading indicators that if properly observed could have potentially got in front of this behavior to understood it more. So Mike, I know you brought this one up because you like this one. This is one of your favorite use cases. If you want to articulate a little more about what you observed, about these impacts in the indicators.
Yeah, the reason I like this, it's the challenge we're all trying to solve for now, and it goes back to Josh's conversation of info sharing. So the government may have had some of these pieces, and the organization may have had some of these pieces.
Yes.
You see it laid out like this, you go, that's a no-brainer. How'd you miss it? Well, it's easy to miss when you think about this individual gets hired and then works on a government site, may never come back into the company fold, if you will, may never be in the company networks, right? These are, and you look at the risk indicators here, these all take place away from work. But so the gov may have had some of this, the company may have had some of this, but independently, the thresholds were never met. When you put it down on that, you're like, oh my goodness, how do we miss this? I think this is just an idea of that risk of that employee that doesn't work within your confines of your physical or cyber universe, but you still own that risk. That's kind of why I like this use case.
And that's good. That's a good point. I think this highlights the need to, have a robust way to share information, but have the privacy concerns in place. Jameson and Josh talked about to ensure we can do this securely, and everybody's protected from the organizations to employees. So,
and Carl, let me just add one point on that case before we get to the next slide. One thing we've highlighted it a few times in this talk, but training our supervisors, did his supervisors see this behavior as it was taking place? And if so, did they know how to report it or who to report it to? This is a maladaptive or this response across the board. If we saw the things, but we weren't empowered enough to get started and take those actions, this is why, we can continue to have jobs, unfortunately. But, it's one of the things where we're training our workforce to spot these things and report these things to us.
Exactly. So we're going to leave with this. So Josh, take us out. And this is kind of where we teed up the last thing. I know, we talked about, wellness, training the program. So if you could kind of take us out on this one, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll throw out a 2-minute warning for last minute questions as we wrap it up. But I think this slide wraps it out well, right? That it highlights that holistic approach to understanding the employee wellness, to working with those managers, just as Jameson was saying, to communicate that they understand their role, that we understand the value of technology, the limitations of technology, and that we use that to inform our assessments along that framework. So I think this slide really sums up the discussions we've had today well. I think it sums up the discussions we've had all year well. And I think with a minute left, I'm looking for one more question from the audience.
Like, I'd bring up our exit slide too, just to give a shout out to the ATARC team.
Yeah, you can bring it up, Josh, that what we're planning on, moving forward.
All right. With that, then, I just want to thank everyone for joining us for this insightful session. I've certainly learned something myself from this great group of our chairs of the Insider Threat Working Group. We hope that you've all gained valuable perspectives on the evolving insider threat landscape and the practical strategies to strengthen your approach to insider risk management. If today's discussion has inspired you to get more involved, we'd love for you to join our working group. This is a fantastic opportunity to collaborate with industry peers, share insights, and contribute to shaping innovative solutions in the critical area. To learn more about the working group or to join the working group, please reach out to Liz or Amy. We'll put their emails in the chat, or you can visit atarc.org. Again, shout out to Liz and Amy for all of their support throughout the year. They have made our jobs so much easier and has made participating in this group a true joy and have really assisted us along the way. So once again, thank you for being part of this session, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with many of you in the working group in the future. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh. Michael. Thanks, Jameson. Take care.
You guys take care.
Everybody.